Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. So let me read that. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few.
Let me add my welcome to Mike. It's great to see you here this lunchtime. Thank you for giving up time to join us here at the Cynics Talks. You may find it useful to have your eyes on this piece of paper. On one side, you'll find a talk outline guiding our way through the passage we've just heard read. Do keep your eyes on that as well, if possible. About 4 years ago, I was on holiday in France with some family and friends, and we were staying, as we often do, in northern France, about 2 hours' drive from Paris. One of our friends had never seen the sights of Paris, and so we planned, one day, a long and big day trip. We set our GPS for the Eiffel Tower, as you do if you want to get into the heart of Paris, and we followed religiously the instructions that Google gave us. The Eiffel Tower, it's pretty hard to miss as you get close, isn't it? Somewhere within the first sort of 10-kilometer perimeter of the Eiffel Tower, you begin to see it very clearly on the horizon. Even us, as a group of English tourists, were not tricked by other landmarks. There was one point, we were probably about 3 kilometers away, when there was a very clear main road going straight to the Eiffel Tower. At that point, Google said, turn right. So we religiously followed. Google knows best, the conclusion in the car. Who knows what traffic might lie ahead? Who knows? There might be a crash, etc., etc. Now, when the tower was still a couple of kilometers away, perpendicular to us now, Google announced at that point, you have arrived at your destination, and we saw in front of us a rather tacky souvenir shop by the same name, the Eiffel Tower souvenir shop. The point of the story, you can't get to the most famous tower in Paris by going on the wrong road. It's just not possible. Let's just think about this very simple principle for a moment. If I start in London and I want to get to Edinburgh in the north, I cannot get to Edinburgh by going on the A23 to Brighton, which is in the south. It's just not possible. Now, I realize this is not an especially profound truth to hit you with this lunchtime, but it is an important one to grasp, because what is true in the physical world that we can easily get our head around is also true in the spiritual world. Where you end up for in eternity depends on what path you take on earth. Where you end up for in eternity depends on what path you take on earth. What that means, of course, is no one will get to heaven by mistake. Nobody will be in heaven and think, oh, wow, I wasn't expecting that. Nobody will be in heaven by chance. Everyone who does get to heaven will be there because of a conscious and careful decision taken here whilst on earth. Jesus is at the point of the sermon where he is impressing this decision upon everybody who's listening. The people around him would have thought, of course, that they were on the right path already. Think about the crowd who were around him. He's got the disciples in the front row, and then he's got the Jewish nation surrounding them, far as the eye can see, as this great crowd has gathered. They were God's chosen people. They knew perfectly well that they belonged in the kingdom of God in heaven. So the idea for them, the idea that eternity still hung in the balance, that a decision had to be made, that must have come as a bit of a shock. That must have nudged a few of them out of their daytime daydreaming. Decision time, says Jesus. It is decision time. And Jesus presents this decision as a choice between two gates. There is the broad gate, and there is a very easy to miss narrow gate. And these two gates stand before each person. An immediate decision is called for. Jesus says, just have a look at verse 13 again, enter by the narrow gate. And so this becomes deeply personal. Which gate will you walk through today? Which gate? Now, some have misread these verses and suggest that the gate is at the end of the road. We spend life going down a road, and then at the end there'll be a gate. Which gate will you choose? That's not right. Let me just read it through again. It's so short, isn't it? As I read it through, just look. What you'll see is that the gate clearly precedes the journey. Verse 13, enter by the narrow gate. For the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter it, enter by it, are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. So the decision about which gate comes first before the journey. And that said, of course, the narrow gate, it's not an especially appealing choice. The wide gate, by contrast, well, that's the obvious choice, isn't it? That's the natural choice. It's the popular choice. It is the choice that everyone wants. Let me try and illustrate all of this. Imagine arriving at one of Disney's famous parks. It doesn't matter if you've ever been to one or not. I think we all probably know enough about Disney to get the rough idea of what it's like. Did you know that when Mr. Walt Disney dreamed up the idea of Disneyland and Disney World and all of that sort of thing, he wanted it to be the happiest place on earth. He wanted it to be the place where you went and your dreams were fulfilled. That was his vision. Doesn't matter if you think he made that vision or not. But just in case anyone's feeling a little bit grumpy or feeling like a bit of a grouch today, let's just say for the sake of this illustration that you do understand that it's a place that is full of joy and happiness, okay? Find your inner child or whatever it takes. As you walk into Disney in this illustration, you find yourself in the middle of a broad road, stretching off into the distance, and in the distance you see the Magic Castle, the famous emblem of Disney. Now, Disney call this main road, I think every park has one, they call it Main Street. And a Disney guide explains to you in one of those sort of character outfits, explains that everything you ever dreamt of was now freely available. The rides were free, the experiences, it's all yours for the taking. And your friends are there, big crowd of friends beckoning you on. Come on, let's go and explore this, looks brilliant. Now, you're about to stride out and go and see what you can find, go and experience some of the joys. When you're stopped in your tracks by a rather unremarkable man, unremarkable in the sense that he doesn't look like the rest of the crowd. He says rather abruptly, don't go that way. Don't go down Main Street. It ends in destruction. It may look fun now, he continues, but I can assure you that everyone that goes down that road will end up miserable in the end. Instead, if you want to live, if you really want to live as you were designed, then you need to go a different way. You need to choose a small gate over there. Do you see it? You follow the man's hand and see a rather unglamorous little side entrance. Nobody is paying any particular attention to this side entrance. It's certainly not a popular choice. People walk past it as though it didn't really exist. And you take a moment to think to yourself, with all of the glam of Main Street ahead of you, why on earth would I ever go down there? Well, almost as though he could read your mind, he says, it won't be easy. The road I'm suggesting, the path, the gate that precedes it, it won't be an easy choice, but it will be worth it. And the man continues, you see, my friend, you were born between two periods of eternity. Between these two periods of eternity, there is a brief pause, your life. And right now, your future eternity hangs in the balance. Everything you see before you, all the glam of Main Street, well, it won't last. And everyone that goes down Main Street will be disappointed in the end. On the other hand, what lies through that door, that easy to miss, unimpressive little door, what lies through there, well, that is a decision you will never regret. And if you don't take that, you will spend eternity regretting it. And so he concludes, today, you have an opportunity to choose the right path. It's decision time. Now, I think as we contemplate this decision, as Jesus presented it to those Jewish crowds all those years ago, I think two questions are raised. And I've tried to anticipate those questions, and you'll see them on the handout there. What sort of life will you get now, and what sort of life will it lead to in the end? So firstly, what sort of life will you get now? If you take the narrow door, that means if you choose to follow Jesus and become a Christian, then the life that Jesus promises is in direct contradiction to any who would say that as a Christian you have your best life now. Jesus says the road through the narrow door is a hard one. The language that's used in the text conveys the idea of trials, persecution. It will mean immediately that you're in the minority for many of life's important decisions. You will find yourself having to go against the flow. Sometimes that will mean having to go against the team, perhaps your family. Life now, in the brief pause before eternity, will be tougher, not easier, says Jesus. It's sometimes said, isn't it, that people in our world today, they choose to become Christians because they need a crutch to get through life. You know, I think Jesus would laugh out loud if he heard people saying that. And he'd say, no, that's not right at all. But if you choose Christianity, you may end up on a crutch, or worse. That's certainly what happened to his early followers, isn't it? Those front row listeners at this stage, 12 disciples, 11 of them were martyred for their faith. The final one was sent off to an island without any family or friends. Incredible physical persecution that early followers faced. That continues today in many parts of the world. Lots of physical persecution. I guess here in the West, becoming a Christian, taking the narrow door leads to social hardships, reputational sidelining. To choose the narrow gate is always the hard option. Main Street, by contrast, Main Street, well, it'll be jammed full of interesting people. It'll be moving in your direction. They'll be there to encourage you, uphold you, and ratify anything you decide. Come and live your dreams. Come and realize your potential. Come and be true to yourself. The temptation to stay on Main Street will be huge, and it will carry on through life. It's bound to. I mean, we love the familiar. And I think as we go through life, we increasingly want to be comfortable. I've worked out recently that I'm now, in terms of my working life, I'm in my third decade in the city, well into my third decade in the city now. Anecdotally, just from what I've seen as I've tried to talk to people about the Christian faith, it doesn't become easier as you go through life. It becomes harder. Generally, people are more interested in their 20s than they are in their 30s or 40s. And it's quite rare to find somebody in later decades who's really hungry and interested, intrigued by the idea of the narrow door. It just looks completely irrelevant as we go down through life. That's just my observation. You may have seen different things yourself. But I guess we need to see, whatever decade we're in, Jesus would only urge us to take the narrow gate leading to the hard way if it was worth it in the end. That's the primary motivation of this passage. Which leads to the final question there. I mean, what sort of life does it lead to then? It's a huge warning conveyed in this passage. You see, the broad way, Main Street, goes straight to destruction. That word destruction, it just means ruin, wasted. Not annihilation, the idea of not existing. You may think to yourself, well, I wasn't aware of the first period of eternity before I was born. No awareness. Some people think, oh, I won't be aware of the second period of after I die. That's not true. Jesus says that's a lie. Instead, an eternal existence where there's nothing good. Jesus uses the word hell in Matthew's gospel a few times. He's already used it to the gathered crowds in chapter 5. We were there a few months back now. I mean, we live in days, don't we, particularly now, when any teaching on hell is not popular. And as a preacher, I don't ever want to be accused of being sensational about things we shouldn't be sensational about. I want to be careful, guarded, therefore, in what I say. But I don't think preachers today are in danger of being sensational. I think most preachers are in danger of being ashamed or silent on the subject of hell. Jesus uses two vivid pictures in Matthew's gospel to help us understand the reality of hell, the reality of this destruction that he's describing here. So let me just read those two verses. Don't worry about turning to them, but you may want to note them down if you want to look at them another time. So this is 5:29. Jesus says, if your right eye causes you to sin, you should tear it out and throw it away. Better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body is thrown into hell. He says later on in chapter 10, verse 28, do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. As concerned parents in this world, we warn our children not to play in dangerous places like a busy road. We wouldn't be unclear about that with a small child. Well, Jesus, in a similar manner, warns the gathered Jewish nation not to choose the wide gate. It'll lead to destruction. What I love by contrast, though, is what Jesus describes as the alternative to this existence of destruction. He doesn't use flowery language. He just simply says life. One road leads to destruction, the other to life, which is fascinating because, of course, it is the life that we were designed for, the very purpose for which humanity was made. There's no better way of describing the eternal existence that's yours for the taking than with the word life. Now, the life that Jesus describes is, of course, life to the full. And it's life that gets better and better as eternity begins. And so as we conclude, as we land all of this, that decision, those two gates stand before every one of us. The narrow gate, a hard way, says Jesus, it won't be easy. And then the broad gate and Main Street, the easy option, the default option, the option we're all on naturally. The narrow gate is the only way you get to heaven. There's no other way. You can't go down Broad Street and find your way in heaven. It's only through the narrow gate. And wonderfully, Jesus' promise is that everyone who takes that gate and that hard road will end up in heaven. It's the way that he took. And he promises through Matthew's gospel to be with everyone who takes that road. And so that makes it infinitely more attractive and valuable than any experience, especially the fleeting pleasures of Main Street. And so there's the decision. That's what we need to think about now. As we head back to our offices, perhaps you've got a few moments just to chat about this, the decision that stands before every one of us. If you were brought along today and you want to know more about how you make that decision, why don't you ask one of us or perhaps the person that brought you along today? We'd love to explain a little bit more. I'm going to finish there, hand straight back to Mikey. Mikey, over to you.